previous section, we have seen how exactly we are using a child component to display this list of components by adding that under a parent component. We have done this hands-on experience where we have displayed the list of hard-coded contacts in our LWC component. Now, as a part of this exercise, what we have seen is how does parent pass on information to the child. So this is what we have seen, where parent is the one that is having the contact records, list of contact records, and the individual childs that I'm pointing out right now is displaying that information. Where is this contact information coming from? This is coming from your parent, where these values are being passed in here for each on the parent component, and these values are being sent as a contact to this child records where we're displaying the name, email, and phone number. Same is the case with the other two contacts as well. Since we have understood how does the parent communicate with the child, now what if child wants to communicate back to the parent? What is that process? Is it just like how we have done that in the above example where we have used @API to pass on that information from the parent to the child? Does the child have similar mechanism, or is it something that is a little complicated? How does it actually work? So let's go ahead and let's go to our VS Code to create. I am currently on my VS Code. For this example, let's create two more components and we'll name them as parent and child. This time these components would be used for communicating the information from the child back to the parent. Let's go ahead and create them. So I'll name my parent as parent listening to child. This would be my parent component. And I'll go ahead and create another component which I'll be naming as child talking to parent. Right, so I've created two components. Since we have discussed that point earlier, we have that parent and child for that LWC if the child is been enclosed in our parent. So let's go ahead and do that first. So I'll open my parent component. Just for our understanding, I'll just add some text here that would help us differentiate parent component and the child component. I'll say this text is from parent LWC. And I'll just add a break statement here so that way anything that I'm adding here comes on the next line. Now here what I wanted to add, I want to add the child component that I've created. How do I add that? Simply write C hyphen your child component name in the kebab case. Right, so where is my component? This is my component, so I'll go ahead and write child. Since T is capital, I'll just replace that capital T with a hyphen and a small letter T. Talking to again is a capital, so I'll just put a hyphen and do a small t. The parent P is also capital, so I'll just convert that to the kebab case. So this is what the kebab case is all about. This is how I would include my child component in my parent, which we have already done. Child component also, just to differentiate this from the parent, I'll say this is coming from child LWC, or I'll say this text is coming from child LWC. What I want this time from the child, I want to pass on some information to the parent. I want parent to listen to the child. So for that to happen, what I'm doing here is I'm just adding one more break tag. In here, what I'll do, I'll go ahead and create a button. Now, why I want to create a button here? I would be creating a button so that way, behind the scenes, I'll be sending a message back to the parent. Upon clicking on this button, child would be sending that information back to the parent. Right, let's see how do we do that. In the pictorial representation of what exactly we are doing, we have a parent component. Inside that we have a child component that we have embedded. Now, earlier we have understood how does the parent communicate to the child. Now this time on the child, what I wanted to do, upon clicking on a button, I want to send a message from the child to the parent. Upon clicking on a button, I want to send a message from the child to the parent. So that is what we are trying to do here. Is it not that simple how we did with the parent and child combination where the parent has directly sent a message to the child? It is not that easy. It applies in the real time also, where the child has to put in some extra effort in terms of getting the attention from their parents. So same thing applies in your LWC as well. What I'm trying to do here, I'm just trying to create a button so that way I can ask the user to click on this button so that they can send out a message to their parents. Let's write the syntax of our button. I'm taking the help of the suggestions that are coming up here. In case if you do not have the suggestions coming up, feel free to copy it from the component library. I'll name this button as talk, send message to parent. All right. And what I wanted to invoke internally, I want to invoke on clicking on this button, on click. I'm using the on click function here, on click event here, to invoke a function that I have not defined yet. Right. So I have not defined that yet. So this is what I've done. So on the child, I have created one button with name send message to the parent. On click of this button, I would be invoking one function which I have not defined yet. And that is what I have on this child component. Let's open the JS file of the child and define that function that we are using. So I'll say handle send message to parent. I'm just creating a function here. So this is the function that I want to be invoked when the button is been clicked. So that piece is done. So this is the place where I need to write down the code. And since we know the syntax, I'm just using console.log just to see if this button has been clicked. I'll say send message to parent. Parent button is clicked, just for my understanding if this function has been executed or not. All right, let's clear out things. So this is what I've written. Now what I need to do, I want to send a message to the parents. Right, I want to send a message to the parent component. So what I'll do, I'll create one property to hold on to that message. I'll say message to parent. So this is my property that I'll be using. Message to the parent. Initially, I'll set it to empty, and we'll see how do we set it. All right. So we have this message that we have set. Before we go ahead and send this message to the parent, let's understand how does the child communicate back to the parent. If you see here, we were sending this message to the parent. That is our intention. But do we know how does this communication happen? The answer is no. So how does this communication happen between the child and the parent? When we dispatch an event, we'll be creating an event and we'll be dispatching that event as a part of this communication. On the child level, what we would do, we would create one event and we'll dispatch that event from the child. On the parent, what we would do, we would be writing on the parent, we have a mechanism to handle that event that has been fired from the child. For time being, what we are doing on the child side, we need to first create an event, and then dispatch that event that we have created. So that is what we are doing here. So step number 1 is to create an event. How does the communication between your child to parent happen? There are a couple of steps here. Step number 1 is to create the event. Let's go ahead and do that. How do we create an event? So as a part of step number 1, what we need to do, we need to go ahead and create an event. So how do I create an event? I'll go ahead and write custom event, and I'll give a name to this event. I'll name this event as send message. So this is what I'll name my event as. Right? I'll name it as send message here. Now if you see here, we have created one event. Now what is the second step? Step 2, the event that is created in step 1. I need to dispatch it. How do I do it? Simply write this dot dispatch event, and I need to pass that custom event that I've created in step number 1. Since I am dividing this process into 2 steps, what I'll do, I'll create one property or a private property that holds this new event that I'm creating here. So I'll simply say event. I'm just using one variable here. I'll simply say child talking property, and I'll just take this and pass it here. All right, so this is what we have done. These are the 2 steps that we are doing at the child side. On the child side, we are creating an event and dispatching it. In case if you ask me, how do you write it if I do not have to break it, the syntax into 2, creating and dispatching and custom event. So how do we do that? Simply write this dot. I'm just combining things, so it would make more sense if I just complete the syntax. Right, creating a custom event on step number 1 and passing it, I can simply write new of custom event and then pass the name of that event. I can do this as well. Right, so whichever syntax that you feel comfortable, feel free to use it. For time being, what I'll do, I'll go ahead with this syntax and I'll just comment out the previous syntax, so that way it would be easier for us to look at the things that are actually being used. So I'm just commenting these lines. Right, so this is the syntax that we have. We are creating and dispatching the event all at once. Now on the parent, what we need to do? On the parent, like discussed, we need to have an handler that is listening to this event that has been fired from the child. Now how do I go ahead and create that? Let's go to our parent component. On the parent component, we already have enclosed our child component. Now on my parent, I already have a child component being used. What I need to tell this LWC component, listen for that event that is coming from your child. What is that event that we are firing? Send message. Now, what is the syntax that I need to use? Just like on click on change events, we'll use on this event that we are getting from the child. What is that event? Send message. All right. So once this message is being received, once the event has been received by this child component, what we need to do? We need to call a function. So I'll name that function as handle message from child. So this is my function that gets invoked once this event is being received at the parent from the child. Remember, child is publishing that event or firing that event or dispatching that event. On the parent, we are having a handler which is handling that event. How does this parent would know that there is an event that has been sent from the child? That is where we are listening to that event on this message being received, on this event being received at our end, will be executing this function that I have on the parent. All right, so I have defined that function here. So did I write the logic for that function? We have not done that yet. Let's go to the JS file of our parent and start writing the function here. Right. So what I'll do when this event has been fired, I'll simply log one console here. Now you might be wondering why we are doing it. Just to understand the process here, I'll say inside the parent handle message from child. So that is what I've done here. Right. So this is basically the console log. In case if you want, you can say event is received inside this one. Right. So this is what we have. Now we had made changes on this one, on the parent component and the child component that we have added. Currently, we do not have the syntax to expose this component. So what we'll do, we'll go ahead and copy the syntax from the previous component that we're using to define the targets and to expose this LWC component. Right, I'll go to the parent and expose this component. Since you already know, once the child component is being used, we do not have to expose them until unless there is a need for that component to be standalone. So on my child component, I'm not setting anything. I'm still setting this is exposed is equals false here. The reason being, I do not want this child component to be a standalone component. I do not want somebody to directly use this component. So that is why I'm hiding this component from the list of available components that you would get on the record page. Whereas the parent component is being exposed because until unless I expose this parent component, I will not see this functionality in action. So let's deploy the changes for the both parent and child components. So I've deployed the parent one. I'm just initiating the child. So the parent thrown an error saying that the child component is not present. So when you're deploying the changes, do the deployment for your child first, followed by your parent, because your parent has a child component inside it. So that is why the previous changes were failing, because my child component is not been deployed yet. So I've deployed those changes. Now I'll go back to the Salesforce or go to the case record page. And this time I'll do a hard refresh because this page is not refreshed for a while. I'm just doing it so that way I can get the latest component that I've deployed, which is nothing but parent listening to the child. Let's add it just above the component that we have used earlier and click on save. Let's go to the case record and do a hard refresh. Now, if you see here, we have a couple of things coming up. So this section that I have is your entire parent component that is added onto the record page. And this is your parent component content. Inside that parent component content, we also have child component content being rendered. Right, so this is your child component content that has been rendered. Right, in the child, we have added text and we have added a button. Now, what we wanted to do, upon clicking on this button, we wanted to send some message to the parent. At this point of time, we do not have that mechanism. All we did was, upon clicking on this button on the console log, I'll be printing a log in the console which indicates that a communication from the child to the parent has happened. Why we are doing it? It's an initial step that we are in the process of understanding how would a child talk to the parent. So that is why we are doing this approach here. So I'll click on send message to the parent. And if you see here, from the child component, a button has been clicked which says send message to the parent button is clicked. Post that, this console log is coming from where? From the parent component. How did I identify that? By looking at this names of my component here itself. Parent listening to the child is a component, that is the parent component. Child talking to the parent is a child component. So when a button is being clicked, a function that I've defined in the parent is getting executed. That itself gives me an understanding that yes, there is a communication that is happening from the child to the parent. Is the message being heard by the parent? The answer is no, because I've not sent any message from the child to the parent. Let's fix that as well. If I go to my component here, I have my child component and the parent component. And just for your information, we have not done that lightning card styling here. We wanted this component to be easily understood, so that is why we are not making any cosmetic changes here. In case if you want, you can just add lightning card around the child and parent components. That way it would be easier for you to understand. So we have this handle send message to the parent. This function would be invoked upon user clicking on this button. Where is this button on? This button is on the child.